Patterns are fairly easy to create, but sometimes those patterns need to be manipulated to make them look real. Julianne Cost here is wearing these pants that have this very intricate little pattern. It's just made up of these little squares and these tinier squares inside and so on. But you see that it's all folding and following the folds of the fabric and so on. So that's what we're going to create now. So I got over here the file where I've got a path that I created. It's going to be the leg. So right onto this leg, we're going to create that pattern and make it look right. So I'm going to go in here and I'm going to select the colors that I want for this. So we'll go back to that other file and we'll pick the colors that we need. So we see that we have these two different types of purplish color here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select the dark one for the foreground and holding down my Option, Alt key, and clicking on the light tone so I have it for the background. So there's the two tones that I want. I could possibly make them a little bit darker just to give them a little more contrast and make this one a little lighter just to make it look a little more defined. Okay, so there. Now that we have the tones that we want, let's go back and create the pattern itself. Now, the whole point to a pattern is that you need perfect symmetry so that the step and repeat process will be seamless. So I'm going to view my grid so I can make a nice solid pattern. I also need the pattern to be fairly small, so I'm going to increase the subdivisions for this grid right here and bring it to a fairly high number so I have really tiny little boxes that I can work with. That's good enough. So I'll click OK, and now I'm going to go in here and start to create my pattern. I still got my path lit so I can kind of see where I'm going, and that looks good. So now I'm going to go in here and just pick an area like this one right here. That little shape right there is going to be my pattern. I can now turn off my path. I don't need it anymore. And what I'm going to do with this is I'm going to go ahead and fill that with that dark tone. So I go in there and say fill with the foreground color. Do it. Then I'm going to select the little squares inside, those two, and I'm going to say fill with the background color. Now I'm going to select that shape there, and I'm going to duplicate it straight down so that it butts up right against it, right there in that corner. Now I'm going to select this side. I'm going to go in there and say fill with the background color. Select the two squares inside and say fill with the foreground color. And like I did before, I'm going to grab that whole bunch and duplicate it down here. I have now set up my pattern. I can select all four little rectangles there and say define pattern. Now I can throw it away. Don't need it anymore. And we still got our background color, so we'll do it this way. Just take this over and copy it over. There we go. So now let's pull back. And we have our pattern, so we no longer need to see the grid. So let's turn off the grid. Now I have the leg there, and in the layer, go in there and create this layer, and we'll call it leg. We're going to create another layer here. In the leg layer, I'm going to just fill that path with a color. So we'll just go in there and say fill it. And I'm going to create another layer, which I just did, and in that layer, I'm going to put the pattern. I'm going to go ahead and fill that layer with that pattern. I select pattern and I choose that tone. Click OK. And there it is. So there's my basic pattern. So now I'm going to go in here and turn off that path I saw was still on there. I'm going to go in here and I'm going to trap this pattern inside of the leg. So I don't need all of this. So I'm going to kind of get rid of some of it. I'm going to go in there and select the small portion of this. Let's pull back a little bit so we can see what we're working on here. I'm going to select the portion right there like this and just dump it, and select this little side here and dump it just so we don't need all that excess stuff. And there I have the pattern. I'm going to clip it inside the leg. Holding down my Option, Alt key, I'm going to click between the two, and now we've trapped the pattern inside of the leg area. This pattern now has to follow the contours of the leg. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to warp it. You'll notice that I'm still in the layer with the pattern. So I'm going to go in there, I'm going to say warp. And I'm going to warp it over so it starts to match the angle of the leg itself. Now, I'm not bringing it all the way in because what's going to happen is I'm going to start to lessen the thickness in certain areas, so it's going to have this feeling like it's getting thinner as it goes around her leg. As you can see, it's starting to happen right there. Right here, the little lines are getting thinner. Let's bring this over, bring this around this way, so you can see how the pattern is starting to take on the shape of the leg. If I can grab these handles, let's bring this one over, let's bring this one up. And you can see how we're starting to bend this, and it's starting to take on the form of the leg itself. Down here, we'll bring this one in, bring this in like this, bring this one out, and there we're starting to get that shape of her leg right in there. All right, so now the pattern is following the contours of the leg. So we'll say, okay. So now, we have a couple little bends here and there where it's going to pinch this fabric. So here's where the puppet warp is going to come in. So I'm going to go in there and say, puppet warp. Now I want to go in there and just manipulate certain parts. I'm going to expand this. I want this to be a little more dense. I want to be able to have more points in there, so I increase the number of polygons that make up the mesh. And I don't need to see the mesh, so I'm going to turn it off. So now I'm going to go in here and start to anchor certain parts that I don't want to move. So I'm going to go like right down through the middle, right here, and just add up some points. These are points that are just going to be used for the point of anchoring. I'm going to start adding some points on this edge that kind of parallel the others right there. And a couple on this side. So I'm getting a whole series of points that I'm going to be able to manipulate. Now I can go in here and start to add points that will be used to bend things, like this one. I'm just going to drag this one in just a little bit. So I got that little bend right there. And maybe I'll add one right here so I can twist this in just a little bit. So I'm getting this little pinch in the fabric, a little pinch right here as well. And maybe one right there, which I can pinch up. So I'm getting these little bends in the fabric at certain points. I'm going to add another one right here where I can kind of bend this one in, and one here where I can bend this one down. So I'm getting a couple of little bends that I could just go in there and just kind of twist it around so I could see what's happening. I'm going to grab one right here, and I want to anchor it on this side. I don't want to bend that side, so I just want to bend this in just a little. So I get a little pinch in the fabric right there. And we'll add another one right there and just kind of bend this over that way. That's good enough. I'm going to click OK. And then we have all these little twists in the fabric. So on top of this, I'm going to add another layer. This layer is going to have the dark tones that are going to be in there for these little recesses. I'm going to go ahead and clip that with this as well. And I'm going to use a black, which I'm going to go in with a soft brush and just kind of start to draw in where I know that these dark tones should be. Right in there like that. And another one right in here and in there. Actually, that one should be more like up above here like that. And let's do a couple in here. And I want to just darken this whole side of the leg now because this is the back side. This is starting to add the dimension to the leg itself. So I'm adding all these tones right along the sides here like that. And here I'm going to add some more folds. So I'm going to get a smaller brush and I'm going to just kind of add a couple of little folds in there and a couple of little highlights in certain spots where I feel they should be. There's the dark tones and a dark tone there. We'll just darken this whole area right up here. All right, so there. Those are those dark tones, which we're going to set to multiply. So just darken that area a little bit. And I'm going to add another one, which I'm also going to clip. Now this one's going to have white. And white is going to be the little highlights here. So we're going to add a little highlight right into this area, right in there. Now you notice that I'm using a lowered opacity brush, so I'm not getting really strong tones. And I'm going to go in there and with a much smaller brush, just add a couple little highlights in certain spots where I want them to be looking like there's a little fold in the fabric there. And right above the knee here. And then just add a little highlight right through the center part there, right there. And there you can see how we've pretty much taken that pattern and distorted it and shaded it so it starts to look like that pattern is in fact part of a pant leg.